非常感谢侯先生给我们的这样一个精彩报告。我突然感觉自己已经不会说中文了哈。然后我们看到就是说，当我们这些理科生们啊，因为大部分在座的可能都是来自于这个就是跟计算机或者是人工智能相关的这个专业，当我们在感叹说软件正在吃掉这个世界，对吧？然后我们人工智能正在进军所谓的传统的社会科学、语言学等等这些领域的时候，我们也不要忘记啊，这个今天这个侯先生给我们看到的，实际上现在的这个人工智能、现在的机器翻译还有非常非常远的路去走，因为机器它不懂得这个世界，它没有一个 meaning 在这里面，而我们人类却在观察这些语言也好，这个世界也好，它会从各种各样的侧面来去观察不同的这种 pattern， 就像我们刚才看到那首诗一样，你可以从发音的角度，你可以从不同的这个空间形状的角度等等，有多个侧面所以这个世界还是比我们机器更加的美好，一个非常真实的这样一个世界哈。好，那接下来呢，就让我们进入一个互动的环节啊，这个看大家有什么问题来提问 ，OK。
Just not okay. Professor Hofstadter,
okay.
I come from the SOMA club, and I'm also a robotics researcher at Intel. My name is Shi Xuesong. Xuesong means cedar kind of tree in rare. My question is about the recent progress on artificial intelligence, and you mentioned you gave some examples where machine translation was awkward or even ridiculous, and you also mentioned that some other tasks like playing Go or computer vision or speech recognition, where state-of-the-art deep neural networks played quite well, and some hard problems that had been thought to require high-level intelligence has not been solved to some extent. So, would you share with us your thoughts on those recent progress of deep neural networks?
I fully agree that there has been some impressive progress in some of the domains that you just mentioned. The question, of course, we don't know whether neural networks, deep neural networks and deep learning are going to be able to go much further. There are lots of problems with such approaches, adversarial examples and so forth. We know that there are problems, and we also know that there are limitations. The reason perhaps behind that I gave this talk in the first place was that about a little over a year ago, there were articles in the newspapers like the New York Times and others that suggested that this new technology of deep neural nets applied to machine translation had revolutionized machine translation and made it roughly as good as human translation. And as a defender of the human mind, and somebody who thinks that translation is a deep art, I felt firstly threatened by that claim, and secondly skeptical of that claim. And so I had to investigate it myself, and I did, and you saw some of the results. I did it with many languages, not just Chinese, but I did it with many languages, and I found that in the domain of machine translation, it was not at all true that they had come close to human translation. They had, of course, done something that was impressive in the sense that you could take a paragraph and cut and paste it and put it into your translation engine, and it would be translated in 1 second, whereas a human being might take 10 minutes to do it. And so, in a sense, it's very impressive. But it's like a dictionary lookup. And it's a fast dictionary lookup. It's not words, but it's phrases. And the phrases are disambiguated by context. But of course, it fails in many cases. And sometimes it does a very impressive job. Now, in other domains, such as chess and Go, which are far smaller than understanding the world, which is what translation requires, translation involves the entire world. Chess doesn't involve the entire world, it involves 64 squares, black and white squares. And similarly with Go, it's more squares, more dots, and so forth. But it's a very limited world, very finite world. Those in such domains, it does, you get deep neural nets doing very good things. We don't know where deep neural nets are going to get us. You mentioned vision. Vision is an interesting thing. There are certainly impressive programs that can sometimes recognize instances of cats and whatnot very well, but they also can be fooled by things that look, two pictures that look identical to a human. It'll say this is a cat, and it'll say something completely different for the other picture because of the adversarial example. So we still have a long way to go in terms of that kind of thing. I don't know where we're going. I agree that there has been a great deal of progress. I'm not a futurologist. I can't predict the future. I don't look forward to the day when, if it arrives, in which computers reach the human intelligence level. I find that a very threatening idea, not a positive one. But I don't know where we're going. It seems like there is a kind of unstoppable momentum towards trying to create computers that are intelligent. I would have understood that idea of trying to create computers that are intelligent 40 years ago, when it seemed like it was such a far off goal that it was mostly just a philosophical hope. But now, when it seems like it might possibly happen, we don't know, now it is not a goal that I am enthusiastic about any longer. It's a goal that I don't like and find disturbing. But as I say, there's a sort of an unstoppable momentum towards it, and where that will lead, nobody knows. It's a big, big, big question. Nobody knows.
In general, do you think the breakthroughs in the research recent years are also breakthroughs in the sense of on the way to achieve human-level intelligence, or do you think those are only incremental improvements? And have those works ever changed your mind on human recognition and cognition and artificial intelligence? Do you think there are any statements in the GEB book that need to be revised?
There's not a word of GEB is going to be revised. There's not going to be another edition. I understand, but what I think you mean, of course, is, would you say that some of the things in GEB are wrong? And yeah, of course, I made some wrong statements in GEB. But I still stand by the flavor of, or the spirit of, what I said in GEB, which let me say this for the benefit of, or just for the sake of clarity. When I wrote GEB back in the mid-1970s, I stated very emphatically and firmly and definitively that I believed that there was no reason computers could not become fully intelligent. There was nothing about computers that would prevent them from being as intelligent as people. However, that was a theoretical statement, an in-principle statement. It wasn't a statement that computers then were as intelligent as people, or that they were about to become as intelligent as people, or that in 50 years they would be as intelligent as people. It wasn't stating anything like that. It was simply stating that in principle it was possible. But at the same time, in the book, I make it very clear that I think that we're, at that time, infinitely far away from such a goal. At this time, I'm not so sure that we're infinitely far away. And you use the word breakthrough, and I think the word breakthrough can be heard as, it can be heard as enthusiastic. That is, a breakthrough is usually considered to be a positive thing, right? But I think if there are breakthroughs or revolutions or something like that, they make me sad rather than happy. I don't want there to be breakthroughs. I don't want there to be revolutions. I don't want there to be things that will suddenly make computers leap ahead and surpass us in intelligence. I don't want to see that. That's a long story. I don't have any answers to your question of whether it's incremental or giant leaps that have been taken. I don't know. There have been some impressive things that have been done. We'll see where it goes. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
好，我们下一位提问者，后面的提问者最好先介绍一下，简单的介绍。
Hello, Professor Hodaren. My name is Wang Pei. In order to attend this...
Interesting, because Wang Pei was one of the translators.
Yeah, one translator, the same name as that translator.
Yeah.
In order to attend this event, I prepared a short essay, and I want to present my thoughts about the artificial intelligence. So,
Well, you can't read an essay.
yeah.
No,
so
no, not
please
now.
Give me some minutes.
No.
Yeah, okay.
No, that's not appropriate. A question is supposed to be a question, not the reading of an essay. I'm sorry, I won't do that.
Okay.
大家还是尽量提问。
Okay, my
尤其是
question.
针对他刚才讲的这部分内容，关于记忆力，我们待会儿后还有一环节。
I'm sure your essay is well thought out, and I respect your essay, but I don't think it's appropriate to read an essay out loud as a question. I think that's wrong.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
My question. Okay, I ask a question. Yeah. In your new book, you explore the theme that the analogy is very important to help us.
What is important?
The analogy.
Analogy is very
Analogy,
important. Yes,
is very important to help us understand the essence of intelligence. But obviously, making analogy needs to find a similarity between two appearing difficult things. In order to achieve that, we need many daily experiences, including emotion and feeling and so on. So do you think, even if we understand the key role of making analogy, we still be far away to understand the general mechanism of intelligence? What's your point about the right?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good question. I think that you put your finger on something very important, which is emotions, and I agree with that totally. For me, thinking and emotions are inseparably connected. Inseparably, they are linked intimately. You can't have thinking without emotions, because emotions means having preferences. I like this better than I like that. I mean, how could I possibly have come up with a let's just take that last thing that I just did, okay? I just went through that Wang Wei poem. You saw that I felt emotional about it. I said to myself, how is it possible that nobody did a 20-syllable thing? That puzzled me. That experience of puzzlement was a frustration, a confusion, a kind of outrage. The next thing was I tried very hard. I looked and I looked and I looked with intense curiosity, intellectual curiosity, desire. I was fascinated. I had a passion to try to find 20 syllables, 4 per line. That excited me. It was exciting. Then once I had done that, I wanted to then I saw there were flaws. And I thought about it. I said, take those commas and periods away. Take the capitals out. This was exciting to me. Then, each stage that I went through further was emotional. It gripped me. It was a passion. I couldn't possibly, inconceivable for me to come up with that translation without being a deeply emotional human being. Emotions were behind that translation from beginning to end. Everything was emotional. So you're absolutely right. Analogies. I assume you were not at my talk yesterday, right? You were not at my talk yesterday? No. Well, I talked about some analogies that involved emotions, and many analogies and emotions are at the core of analogies. And I gave some examples. I'm not going to give them today. But you are completely right that emotions are very central to thinking and have to be part of what thinking is all about. Absolutely right. And I appreciate that contribution to the discussion. That's very, very good. Thank you.
The next one. Okay.
All right. Hi, Professor. I'm a sophomore of UCSB. I'm in my gap quarter now.
Oh, okay.
I have a question about analogy. I mean, I highly agree that analogy can be regarded as the fuel and fire of our thinking.
Okay.
But how does this fire enlighten a new way in our science and common sense? I mean, even now, reductionism and logical reasoning are still dominant approaches to science. So, how will the awareness of analogy influence and guide our scientific research in the future? I mean, do you believe there will be a paradigm shift in science which bases on the analogy and the metaphor?
I understand your question. I think that you're wrong about the nature of science. All good science is based on analogy and always has been.
I know that, but I mean the reductionism is dominant in the field of science now. I mean, we should put more effort on the essence of analogy in science.
Well, I'll try to reply to your question. I mean, the great scientists, I'll take physics as that's the science that I know the best, but say Newton and Faraday and Maxwell and Helmholtz, Planck, Bohr, Einstein, Dirac, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and on and on and on. I looked at the fundamental discoveries made by these people because I gave a course on analogy making in physics, and it turned out that every single discovery they made was made through analogy. It was not made through some kind of logical reasoning. It was made through analogy. And nobody, all profound insights come in that manner. And very often what happens is that the analogies that gave rise to the deep insights get buried and get forgotten. And then only the deep insights are given and are sort of defended as if they were logical, as if they'd come out of some kind of pure logical deduction principle. But when you go back to the history of science and actually see how the things were discovered, it turns out that analogy is how they were always discovered. So it's not as if we have to teach scientists to think by analogy. What we could teach scientists to do is how to communicate more clearly what it is that they really do, and to use more analogies in their discussion and to clarify things more by analogy. And in that sense, I think you're right. The analogy has to be brought more to the awareness of people, and we shouldn't pretend that science is some kind of very strictly logical process, but which it often is presented as being. So I agree with that notion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I mean, I highly agree that analogy lies at the root of all concept, not merely in our daily speaking, but also in the field of physics and mathematics.
Yeah.
But actually, I feel the academic train us to think. To regard the science as some not something like a analogy. I mean, we just. I mean, how should us to put more effort to light the scientists in the future to aware about the importance of analogy?
Well, as I said, I think it's good for people for scientists to expose their analogies rather than to hide them. But any good scientist, any deep scientist, is automatically thinking by analogy anyway. They automatically do, because that's what humans do best. And so we don't have to teach scientists to use analogy because they do it automatically. We just have to. We should try to get them to not be ashamed of it, instead, and to say it out loud. Hey, I thought of this by analogy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
好，我们还是下一位。
Hey Douglas, I'm from the Squaraga Club, and I'm a PhD student, and my interest is in computational neuroscience and deep learning and dynamical systems. And one of the hot topics now in deep learning is functional learning, and that is learning an agent based just on a few examples. For example, a child never knows the knowledge about the giraffe, but one day her mom tells her this is a giraffe, and next weekend her mom take her to the zoo, and he knows everything, maybe everything about the giraffe. That is a meta knowledge, I think. Maybe this is due to the evolution, or this is due to the learning in the past when she is 1 year old or 2 years old, right? So one of the way to do functional learning is meta learning. That is learning to learn. And I think that the state-of-the-art Google machine translator sometimes make mistakes because it mainly care about current sentence. Just this current sentence, not about the sentence in the context or the situation where it came from.
Well, it doesn't have any understanding of situations, so it couldn't possibly use the context because it doesn't understand situations.
Yeah. So my question is, what about add some meta knowledge to the translator? So and how?
Well, yeah. I mean, what you have to do is you have to add understanding of words. You have to know that words stand for things. That words symbolize things in the world. They symbolize objects. They symbolize actions. They symbolize relationships. And the phrases stand for things. And once you're doing that, you're trying to get what Bar Hillel said was. Getting an encyclopedia. He said an encyclopedic understanding, and he said that's utterly chimerical. Well, it may not be utterly chimerical today because computers are much bigger than they were back then. 60 years have passed, and maybe giving computers knowledge of the world is a possible thing to do. Having them interact with the world in such a way that words take on meanings because these words stand for things in the world. That's that could be thought of as an approach to the improvement not only of machine translation but of machine thinking. As I say, here we get on to what I think of as dangerous territory. Because once you start going down that slippery slope, who knows where it's going to wind up? Who knows whether we human beings are going to be superseded by a different kind of creature? Superseded meaning taken over by, rendered part of the past. Are we creating wittingly or unwittingly our own successors? Do we want to create our own successors? Or are we just going to ride the tsunami like a surfer and say, what the hell, this is fun. Oops, looks like I've been outmoded. Looks like I and my children have been outmoded. We're now trivia compared with computers that we have created, or computational devices. Do we really want that? It's not a future that I would look forward to myself. I would like to get off. I would like humanity to get off of the wave. But the wave is compelling to many people. Now, I don't know in your case. I suspect in your case it's compelling to be on part of this wave out of some kind of intellectual desire. But I think in the case of larger entities like corporations, it doesn't come out of any intellectual curiosity. It comes out of money making. And I think that money making, the desire to make money, is something that is unstoppable, unfortunately. So I'm just worried. That's my feeling.
最后一个问题，最后一个这边也是。
Hi, Professor Ho. Actually, I followed you to the Tsinghua event yesterday as well.
Yes.
I'm a journalist. You can call me Isabel. And I'm not a science major. I was a language major and then a journalism major. So I guess my questions are more liberal arts, kind of. My question, I have two questions actually. First question, it sounds like machines may not be good translators, but they are already top players in chess competitions and other competitions. And that in itself is intimidating enough. So, and many people are worried that it has already robbed many people of their jobs. So my question is, do you think that it's a big challenge to us already? No matter how machines are unintelligent, they have already advanced in a lot of competitions and beat human beings in those competitions. That's the first question.
Well, I understand. I don't know how many people have been put out of jobs, and I feel that is worrisome. Yes, and that's troubling. I'm not an expert on the social impact of artificial intelligence. I don't know how much of an impact it has had so far, but of course, as time progresses, it will have an ever larger impact. That's clear. I mean, for example, we hear about the idea that drivers of taxis and drivers of Uber and things like that are going to all be replaced by machines, and so forth. I heard the other day, indirectly through a friend, that there was an attempt by Tengshun to get a computer program or piece of software, hardware, whatever you want to call it, to do simultaneous translation at a conference recently. I don't know where, and I'm not aware of what? Okay, I don't know anything about it. And I was told by the person involved that it was not a very big success. She used a word that was a little bit less flattering than that, but she wasn't very negative. She said it just didn't work very well, something like that. And I was very delighted to hear that, and I wasn't surprised. I thought it sounded like a very unlikely thing to succeed. But at the same time, there's a profession that might be considered to be threatened, that of simultaneous translator. I certainly hope it won't be, and it would be shocking to me if it were, but I can't predict what is going to happen. So yes, I am worried about it. I dislike it intensely. But I had not foreseen this kind of thing back in 1975 when I was writing GEB. I had not foreseen the idea that there would be things that would be challenging humans in very human domains. I had not expected that. I thought that computers were always, for the next few hundred years anyway, going to be way below humans. That was my intuition. And that's what I expressed in some of the passages in GEB that turned out to be somewhat wrong. It's shocking and troubling to me. So that's the reaction of one person. Mm-hmm.
Okay, my second question is actually there are robot journalists now as well. Tencent has Dreamwriter who can write scripts without human intelligence, and it has already many journalists are in the threat of losing jobs, and so we are all deeply terrified. And it sounds like you are also very worried because you're afraid of what will happen when AI has really advanced out of our expectations.
Let's say if instead of when.
If. Okay, but the thing is, history evolves no matter what we want, and what will happen will happen. So no matter how unwilling we are of this technology advancing too much, if it's going to happen, and what should we do now to kind of, how to say, to keep the value of the human intelligence, no matter how technology advances in a speed that we cannot imagine?
You're asking questions that I have no answers to. I couldn't possibly tell you how we should prepare. You know, I don't know the answers to such questions. I will tell you that I have been worried about this kind of scenario. By the way, you say that there are robot journalists who you're worried that they might put you out of a job. I find that very, very unlikely. But I mean, the world is far too complex. As you can see, Google Translate can't even understand the box was in the pen. It doesn't even understand that much. So I don't think that there are going to be programs that can write better text about complicated world events, 1,000,000 times more complicated than boxes being located in pens. Better than human beings who understand the situations very deeply. So if they can do so, they can do so in extraordinarily limited domains. And if they can do so, it's only in extraordinarily limited domains. And I mean, you know, if I'm proven wrong, okay, what can I say? But I'm extremely skeptical of this happening. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to say, though, is that for about 25 years, I've been worried about the future of artificial intelligence, getting progressively more worried, but at the same time seeing all sorts of evidence that we're not anywhere close yet, like I just showed today. But there are books written, of course, about the so-called singularity by people like Ray Kurzweil and Hans Moravec, who write about the future. Hans Moravec, who was a roboticist, a famous roboticist, wrote a book called, I think it was called Mind Children. Mind Children. And in it, he envisions a scenario in which computers take over. They're much smarter than we are, but they're not only smarter, they're also more compassionate, more generous, more cultured. They're just better than we are. And he says, what could be better than to produce one's own successors? He says, this is great. Mind children, they will be our successors. I mean, let's put it this way. I once wrote an article. I called it, Who Will Be We in 2493? The word we is a tricky word. We, the people in this room, use it to talk about humanity. But how about we 1,000 years ago? Can I say, what were we doing? What were we doing 1,000 years ago? What were we doing 10,000 years ago? What were we doing 100,000 years ago? Who does we refer to? Who does we refer to when I say, I hope that we will be wiser in the future? Who is it referring to? How far in the future? 3,000 years in the future? What if we, 3,000 years in the future, is not the people that were created by sexual intercourse, but people, things, entities, thinking things that were created by technological advances? And they're computational beings. They're our successors. They are our mind children. And they're better than us. They're nicer and smarter and sweeter and more creative and more generous. Well, maybe that's what Hans Moravec says. He welcomes that. He thinks, what could be better than to have given rise to mind children like that? That would be the best possible outcome. That's his view. I can understand that viewpoint. When I look at the world today, all I see is conflict and horrible things happening. And I think, gee, human beings aren't so great after all, even though I admire the human mind. The world is filled with disgusting, horrible things. Maybe if we could create a race of thinking entities that is kinder than us, maybe that's better. Maybe that's the best. It's not what I really like, but maybe that's the way we're going. As you say, history happens, things evolve. We can't stop it. Maybe it'll be better, maybe it won't. We don't know.
好，那我们这个就是现场提问这个环节就是暂告一个段落，然后下面进入我们的第二部分，也就是关于这个就是大家都熟知的这个 GEB 这本书，就是戈德尔、埃舍尔、巴赫。这本书呢，首先就是我想表达一下，就是它对我的影响。事实上，在2003年的时候，也是我们极致俱乐部的最开始的一个网站刚刚上线的时候，当时呢有2本书，深刻的影响了我。一本书呢就是这个 Complexity， 但不是这个侯史达的那个学生翻译的那本，而是一个叫 Wardrop 一个人，然后记述的是圣塔菲研究所的故事。这本书让我决定就是走到这个复杂性这个领域里面来去做研究。然后第二一本书呢就是这本 GEB 戈德尔、埃舍尔、巴赫这本书影响了我，他让我下定决心一辈子就干这个了。对，第一本书还不足以让我下决心，但是第二本书让我下决心，然后下了这个决心以后，其实才有慢慢有了这些网站，才愿意去奉献很多的时间去做这件事情，所以对我影响是非常的深。然后后来到了这个大概是09年、10年左右的时候，我们开始极致俱乐部组织线下的读书会，reader group，to read GEB 这本书。在这个过程之中，有非常多有意思的事情发生。我就举一个非常简单的例子，就是在当年就是在这本书里面，GEB这本书里面，那么其中有一个小小的实验，非常有意思，就是我们可以把一个摄像机和一个电视连在一起，形成一个视觉的一个反馈回路。这样的话，你摄像机射出来的画面直接就反馈到电视屏幕上。然后呢，但是这个还不是关键因为关键的时候是在于。对，这款有一个简单的视频哈，就是关键是在于呢，就是说你这么一反馈以后，你会看到就像2面镜子对着照，形成一个无穷远的一个 corridor 一个走廊。但是呢，更有意思的是，那个摄像机上有一个旋钮叫做 zoom in， 你可以放大这个画面。所以当我们看到一个无穷远的一个亮点的时候，我们可以 zoom in 它，把它放大。那这个时候呢，就非常有意思。当你调那个参数，就 brightness， 还有一个对比度这些东西你调合适的这个时候，它就会突然产生了复杂的分形结构。这里面是其中的一个摄像机射出来的结果。如果你换不同的摄像机，特别是那些低保真的那种模拟的线路的那种摄像机，你看到的是另外一番景象，很像那种星系的爆炸、宇宙的产生。所以当时就是我在自己家实验出这个结果的时候，我就真的是被电到了，被雷劈的那种击中的那种感觉。然后后来我们在极致俱乐部曾经花过1整天的时间，我们大概有10个人左右，没干别的，就一直在做这个实验。这是当天的一个情景，就是我们在做那个实验，在3号会所嘛，那个现在3号会所已经拆了。所以从这个角度来说呢，就是实际上我们已经冥冥之中跟侯世达先生实际上有一个这种联系就是跟 GEB 有这种联系。所以呢，就是为了表达就是对这个我又说错了，侯道仁先生这样一个敬意，也是对这本书 GEB 的这个敬意呢，我们送上我们准备的这个礼物。Thank you very much. And this is the book which is written by many of the members. Yeah, this book. Yeah, we can show to the audience. Yeah, the picture. So this is actually the Chinese name is 科学的极致 because our club is 极致俱乐部. So we use the same pronunciation. Yeah, 科学的极致. And the second title is the introduction of artificial intelligence. And within this book, there is a chapter. 我又转换成英文了。在这个书里面呢，有一个章节就是在介绍这个 GEB。实际上，这整本书都是在做 在对这个人工智能做一个总体上的一个概览性的一个介绍啊，其中一个章节就是我写的，就是在介绍这个 GEB 这本书里面的内容，所以也希望那个侯先生能够那个来读一读我们这个 chapter。
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. After that, we like to ask you to say something about GEB, this book. Maybe you do not like to repeat the content of GEB, but you can talk about the feedback from the readers, and of course you can talk about how can your idea evolve from GEB into maybe the surface and the essence. Yeah, you can say something.
I appreciate what you suggest that I talk about, but I decided I would talk about something else.
That's fine.
I guess it's too tempting to say I'm not a robot, so I won't say that. I want to go back and talk about GEB, though. I want to talk about how it evolved and then how the translations evolved. I think that's an interesting thing, and to talk about some of the things that happened in the translation. So GEB was originally something that I was thinking about when I was revisiting Gödel's theorem as somebody who was in his late 20s. I had been fascinated by Gödel's theorem when I was a teenager, and I was revisiting it after an absence of about 10 years. And all of a sudden, I connected the ideas of self-reference. Well, I think I had already done it when I was a teenager, but I had never done it explicitly. But explicitly, I started thinking that the ideas in Gödel's proof were closely connected to my vision of what consciousness and a human I, capital I, 自我, are. And so I started writing a book in the early 70s, and I worked on it very hard. And I'm not going to tell about that. But in 1977, when the book was nearly finished, I became a professor at Indiana University. And one of my first friends was named Don Bird, and Don was a computer scientist who was fascinated by music, or he was a musician who was fascinated by computers, both ways. And we had a lot in common, a great deal in common. We became very close friends. Well, eventually GEB came out in 1979. And, before it came out, about 2 months before it came out, I was sent 6 copies of the book in a box. And I gave one of them immediately to Don Bird, who was thrilled to have one of the first copies in the world. And then a few weeks passed, 2 or 3 weeks passed, and Don was walking across the campus of Indiana University, and he saw somebody carrying a copy of GEB. And he had no idea how it was possible. The book hadn't yet been published, as far as he knew. And here was some random person carrying a copy of GEB. Don excitedly ran up to him and said, "Where did you get that book?" And the guy said, "Oh, I was over at Howard's bookstore." Now, Howard's bookstore was Bloomington's best bookstore at that time. It was rather small. It was about the size of this room. And David, this was Mo Dawe, as it turns out. David had been there earlier that day, maybe an hour earlier. And he had walked in, and right at that moment, Howard, the owner, was opening a box on the floor. He was pulling open a box of books. Now, the reason Howard had pre-publication copies was that his was the bookstore in Bloomington, which is the city where the author resided. And they wanted to have the first copies go to Bloomington. And so the box was the first box of GEB that was being opened in any bookstore in the world. David watched Howard open the book, so the box, and he looked at the title, and he said, "Gödel Eshabach, I'll buy that book." He picked it up and bought it. He was the first person in the world to buy GEB. The first person. And Don saw him about an hour later walking across the campus. Don started getting to become friends with David, and he introduced me to David, and we became very good friends. Of course, David's name was not Mo Dawe. David's name was David Moser, and David did not know one word of Chinese. He had grown up in Oklahoma, which is a state in the middle of the United States, and his parents didn't speak any foreign languages, and David didn't speak any foreign languages. He had studied French and German a little bit, but he didn't speak any foreign languages at all well. But he loved language. He was a writer, principally a writer. And he was also, though, at the same time, a music graduate student, a student of composition. And so Don and David became very good friends, and I became a very good friend. And then it turned out that Don and David both moved to Boston in 1982 or so, 1981 or 82. Well, I had a sabbatical year coming up, and I, for some reason that I don't remember clearly, decided to go spend it in Boston at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in 1983-84. And one of the principal people at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, a hero to many people in artificial intelligence, and probably most of you know this name, was Marvin Minsky. And Marvin Minsky became a good friend of Don's, a good friend of David's, a good friend of mine, and a good friend of my friend Dan Dennett, the philosopher of mind. We all used to hang out at Marvin Minsky's house in the evenings. Not every day, but often. And they would often order Chinese food. And so there was a good Chinese restaurant just around the corner. And so one day, the Chinese restaurant brought the food to the house, and they put it down on the table in little white boxes. And on one of the boxes, I saw the following shape. Ju, ju. 2 lines. And I said, oh, that's probably chicken. And because, ji or ji, depending on what the context, ji, I said, that's probably chicken. And on another one, I said, oh, that's probably rice. And David looked at me. Oh, I forgot to say about David, he grew up in Oklahoma, but his parents, despite not speaking any foreign languages, always had international students living with them. There was a small university in the town that they lived in, and they always had international students. Some of them were from Africa, and some of them were from China. And David had been surrounded by Chinese people ever since he was little, but he didn't know a word of Chinese, and he assumed that it was impossible for somebody who was not born in China to speak Chinese. He assumed that that was an impossibility, a contradiction in terms. You had to be Chinese in order to speak Chinese. And here was Doug Hofstadter looking at something and saying, this must be chicken and this must be rice. And he said, that's crazy. He is able to understand those symbols? Oh my God, maybe I could do it too. And so I said, he got all excited. This is about the role of emotions in thinking. Talk about emotions. He got so excited. And I said, David, look, I've been studying Chinese for a few years. I have a wonderful book that I like. How about if I record the first few lessons for you? I'll just go through it, read it sentence by sentence. And he said, great. So I recorded the first 8 lessons in the Chinese reader that I had by John DeFrancis. And I gave the little cassette tape to David. And that way, that was David's first lessons in Chinese. I was Mo Dawe's first Chinese teacher. Ho Daoren was Mo Dawe's first Chinese teacher. Unfortunately, I can no longer teach him anything in Chinese. Well, I might know some unusual character that he doesn't know, but basically, anyway, that's not the point. He's infinitely better than I am. So that was kind of funny. David then first he went to Taiwan and he studied Chinese there, and then he came to Beijing and became part of the translation team, along with Guo Weide and other people, many other people, Wang Pei, and Yan Yong, and Liu Haoming, and others. And they had a wonderful time, and David did Shangshang on television and so forth. David became a very famous person in China. But I jumped the gun because I forgot to tell you something interesting. in 1980, after GEB came out, I realized that it had a chance of being translated into another language, but it was so filled from beginning to end with wordplay and playfulness and games. Well, games isn't quite the right word, but playfulness and puns, 双关语 and so forth. It was all filled to the brim with such things. I wanted them to be reproduced. I didn't want them to be explained in a foreign language. Reproduced doesn't mean copied exactly. It means approximately, something similar. I wanted translation to be done by analogy. And so I spent a year, 1980, 81, annotating a copy of the book. I had a copy of the book, and every page, I wrote tons of things in red ink on every page. Hundreds and hundreds of pages, hundreds and thousands of remarks for translators. I didn't know into what language. I just knew that this was what translators needed. Then, when I found out there were going to be some translations into foreign languages, I wrote a cover letter that was many, many pages long, explaining my philosophy of translation to these people. And then, in 1982, I received a letter from a person in France named, of all things, Bob French. And Bob French was a French translator. He was American, but he was a translator of French, from English into French and French into English. And he proposed doing a translation with his partner, Jacqueline Henry. The two of them would translate GEB into French. And I could just tell from the letter that he was extremely smart and that this would be the perfect team. Well, so I went to France in 1983 and met with Bob and Jacqueline. And as it happened, David Moser was there with us in 1983 in Paris, as was another person, Ronald Yonkers, who was going to be the Dutch translator of GEB. And so if I count correctly, Doug, David, Ronald, Bob, Jacqueline, 5 people, we met day after day after day in some cafes in the Quartier Latin, the university area of Paris. Day after day, we would discuss the translation issues. And it was extremely exciting. David was listening. He wasn't going to be a translator. Ronald and Bob and Jacqueline were. David was just interested, and he was making all sorts of intelligent comments. Little could he have known or ever suspected that he was going to be part of the translation team into Chinese, a language of which he knew not one word at that time. Not one word. And that's really quite a remarkable story. So that was in 1983. So I think that's probably enough of some of the reminiscences about GEB. I wanted to tell you these things because it's a fun story. I can tell you more if you have questions, but I thought that would be a good launching point for some discussions about GEB.
好，非常感谢。让我们还是再一次感谢所有参与这个GEB的翻译的译者，真的是非常不容易，我们感谢。